All right, so everyone's here. I believe we can start. So then, more officially, good afternoon to all, and welcome to IPOR Labs Twitter space on applying TradFi fundamentals in DeFi. Thank you for the dedication in joining our space on a Saturday after such an eventful week in crypto, actually a few weeks. So I would also like to thank our guests for taking the time to join and share their unique insights as founders in the DeFi space and also as DeFi natives. Unfortunately, Will Villanueva from Element Finance informed us a few minutes ago that he will not be able to join, so we'll have him next time. So there's undoubtedly much to discuss, so let's start with a short intro of the plan for today. So together with the speakers, we have collaborated on a few discussion topics that we believe are super relevant on the background of the general macroeconomic environment and the state of the crypto industry after the FTX Black Swan. So I would like to focus on those first and then allow for the discussion to evolve naturally. I would also like to have some time at the end for a Q&A session if there are any comments or questions coming from the participants. I would like to address those. So if you're a participant, please make sure to request a permission to speak at any time so that I'm notified that you would like to join and ask a question. So before we start with the discussion, I would like to invite the participants to briefly introduce themselves and their projects, starting with the co-host Darren Camas from IPOR. So Darren, please.
All right, so I guess a little bit about myself. My name is Darren. I've been building in the space for about 11 years now. Quite excited about IPOR. It's tackling the benchmark interest rates as well as interest rate derivatives as a space of the DeFi credit markets.
Cool. Maybe, okay. Paul could go next.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the space for 6 years, mostly focused on decentralized algorithms research and consensus algorithms, and finally went a little bit up the stack, smart contracts, and then DeFi. So I'm building Morpho, lending protocol that is optimizing Compound and Aave, and we'll have the chance to discuss it hopefully throughout the space.
Perfect. Thank you. And I have Simon next on my list.
Hey, sure. So I'm Simon. I am the CEO and co-founder of Voltz Labs. In terms of me personally, this is actually now my third financial technology company. And across those three, including the investing work that I've done, I've now been involved in about $1 billion of value creation. But what actually matters a lot more is all those three businesses have been very focused on democratizing access to financial services, which clearly kind of fits like a glove, really, with what we're all trying to do in DeFi. In terms of Voltz, so Voltz protocol is what we describe as an interest rate swap AMM. So for anyone familiar with interest rate swaps in traditional finance, you'll know it's one of the biggest markets in the world. In fact, there's a cartoonishly large quadrillion of notional traded each year in TradFi IRS. And before we launched Voltz protocol, that number in DeFi was actually 0. But we launched 5 months ago, and we've been growing about 30% each week since.
Nice. Great. Thank you, Simon. And then Kamel?
Hello. Thank you for hosting today. My name is Kamel. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Contango Exchange. Our mission is quite simple. We're here to bring explorable futures, so it means futures with an expiry date, to decentralized finance. These products already exist in CeFi and in TradFi. Indeed, in TradFi, you don't really find perpetuals. You find only futures, explorable futures. And super exciting to be here because we're building on top of protocols using, like, let's say, rates, variable rates, or mainly fixed rates. So we need fixed rates, but then you can build with the money Legos we have by using, like, for example, variable rates and interest rate swaps. So yeah, happy to be part of this panel and to brainstorm a bit together.
Perfect, thank you. And just a short intro on my side, because I always forget to introduce myself real quick. I'm Vlad from IPOR, and yeah, I'm taking care of marketing, as you have potentially already guessed. So yeah, I will give the floor now to Darren, who could start with the discussion topics. Yeah, Darren, again, the floor is yours, sir.
All right. Well, glad to be, on such a nice panel. Actually, we're sitting in a room together in Barcelona, so it's kind of funny to have a Twitter space in person. So I guess we're all kind of tackling the fixed income world in DeFi in some ways, and Contango is actually leveraging that to create different financial products. So what piqued your interest in the fixed income space? All the volume seems to be in the perps, in a lot of the more speculative instruments, but why fixed income?
Well, when we were looking at building explorer futures, we went back to financial engineering textbook, and indeed the pricing of futures is really straightforward. It's called the interest rate parity. And basically what this pricing formula tells you is that to price a future, you simply need to borrow the quote currency, swap it for the base, and then land the base currency. So if I do it with an example, if you want to go long on ETH DAI, you borrow DAI at a fixed rate, you swap DAI for ETH, and then you land ETH at a fixed rate. And if you know the quantity of ETH you want at delivery, and you know all the interest rates, and you know the spot price, then you can price the futures. And more interestingly, you can do that in decentralized finance through one atomic transaction, which makes like Contango very specific, because it's a new product that absolutely doesn't exist into traditional finance. You cannot have atomic swaps. It would be like way more complicated to have this technology there. And our hypothesis here is that fixed rate markets are one of the biggest liquidity pools or biggest markets you can have in TradFi. And we're saying that instead of having dedicated liquidity pools for explorable futures, which is the case in TradFi or CeFi, where you have like different market makers, we're saying that we're going to tap into the liquidity of fixed rate markets and expand also that to variable rate markets, and using, like, for example, interest rate swaps, and bring explorable futures as a structured products built on top of these protocols.
Okay, thanks. And I mean, actually, so we've been working and talking together, during this week in Barcelona, and one of the hurdles for Contango is let's say, the lack of liquidity in these kind of fixed rate products. And I guess, speaking of liquidity, Morpho is really focusing on optimizing liquidity. So, how Paul, how does what is Morpho's mission?
So Morpho's goal is to build efficient lending services for everyone. So basically, you have Aave and Compound that is already doing that, but the problem is they have huge inefficiencies built in their protocol. And basically, you could see that looking at their interest rates. Like, you have a very low lending interest rate, a very high borrowing interest rate. So it's like 1% to lend and 3% to borrow. And basically what Morpho does is introducing a lending protocol that is different because it's built on top of existing lending protocols. So if you have Compound, then you have Morpho Compound. If you have Aave, then you have Morpho Aave. And Morpho Compound, for example, is going to match users peer-to-peer at the mid-rate. So instead of lending at 1, you'll be lending at 2%. And instead of borrowing at 3, you'll be borrowing at 2%. And so the very cool thing about Morpho is that it's going to provide the exact same product as Compound or as Aave, with the same liquidity available. So you'll be able to withdraw at any time, borrow at any time, up to billions of dollars when you vote, but you'll have also the same risk parameters, so the same collateralization ratio, the same liquidation threshold, the same oracle, so literally the same thing. But the only difference here is that Morpho would have better rates out of it, so a better capital efficiency, a better optimization of the utilization of the capital. So basically, that's what we built. You have to think of it as the optimizer of Aave or the optimizer of Compound. So if you're using Compound, you should consider using Morpho Compound, and same for Aave. And we've been here for 4 months now, and we're now the third biggest lending protocol with 300 million in total deposits. And yeah, so that's it for Morpho for the moment, I would say.
So, maybe in summary, I think the bonding curve or the rate mechanism on Aave and Compound is really optimizing for liquidity within the pools, whereas Morpho is really optimizing for the rate behavior. Would that be a fair summary?
Exactly, yeah. But could you just cut your mic? Yep, sorry. No, this is exactly it. And basically, Morpho, I would say, is not taking any trade-off. So you have the liquidity of the underlying pool that Aave is trying to optimize for. But on top of that, you have the capital efficiency of the matching engine of Morpho. So yeah, that's basically combining both of the worlds.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And Simon, you'd mentioned about this behemoth market, this interest rate derivatives market, and more importantly, interest rate swaps. And I think, so both you and IPOR Labs are in the interest rate derivatives market, and we take various different approaches. So maybe can you go explain, a little bit about Voltz?
Sure. So, and maybe going all the way back to the first question you asked, which is kind of like, why are we even in this space in the first place? I guess there's two parts to that. The first part really is why does Voltz Labs exist as an entity? And what we hold as our North Star as a team is that we really want DeFi to become the financial system for the whole of the world. And in doing so, we frankly want to try and change and improve the lives of billions of people. But in order to enable that, there was kind of a pretty significant problem that we saw at the most macro level with the whole ecosystem, which is that the ecosystem as a whole was extremely volatile, and this produced kind of variable rates, which at times could jump from around 2% to over 40% to back to 2%, actually within a very short period of time. And clearly, whilst the ecosystem is that volatile, it's only ever going to be able to serve a very narrow subset of the world's financial needs. So if we actually want DeFi to become the financial system for the whole of the world, then we need to find a way of removing volatility and kind of introducing stability in many ways into the ecosystem. And when we started kind of diving into, well, how do you solve that problem? The answer to that basically is a derivative rates market, i.e. An interest rate swap market, that enables people to move from something that is variable and therefore has the potential to be volatile through to something that is fixed and therefore stable. And in doing so, it has massively expanded the use cases that can be built throughout the whole ecosystem and gives us a genuine opportunity for DeFi to start serving the financial needs of the whole of the world. It just so happens, if you go back to that, that's our North Star, is to help DeFi become the financial system of the whole of the world. We spotted this problem, and this is how we solved it. It just so happens that in traditional finance, this is one of the biggest markets in the world. And it is one of the biggest markets in the world because it is such an incredibly important kind of pillar to a well-functioning financial system that enables unlocks all sorts of different use cases, which predominantly kind of exist across risk management, speculation, and then product construction. And to kind of double click, so to speak, on that third one, product construction can be a bunch of structured products for corporates, but then it could also be kind of products for retail, like fixed rate mortgages. And what we expect to happen off the back of kind of Voltz and other players like IPOR being in this space is we expect this kind of new world of product opportunities to start being built, such that DeFi actually can start serving the financial needs of the whole of the world.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think we also we have let's say similar kind of markets where we're attacking interest rate derivatives, but we also have a very different approach. I mean, you take an approach for hedging across different markets, where I think IPOR, let's say we take a more macro approach, which is this this synthesized benchmark rate. So can you give us a little example about the different Voltz interest rate derivatives?
Yeah, so on Voltz protocol, there are various different markets that are live today that exist across Aave and Compound kind of lend or borrow markets, and then also two ETH staking providers, so Lido and Rocket. And from our perspective, what the way that, well, maybe if I take a step back, the way that that works, one of the like design criteria that we are optimizing for is to make sure that everything existed on chain, such that the protocol is as composable as possible, to enable all of these other products to be built. So what we did initially is we built on-chain rate oracles that basically pull in the rates that are being created on Aave, Compound, or Lido and Rocket, and they pull that into the Voltz ecosystem such that people can start trading rates against that. If we wanted to, we could expand those rate oracles to create an index. From our perspective, actually, that wouldn't be that complicated to do. It's just not where we've chosen to start. And like going back to this product construction point, the reason is if someone wants to build some sort of structured product on staked ETH, then like that opportunity is unlocked with a stake. From our perspective, that opportunity is unlocked with a staked ETH market, right? But of course, that's not to say there's not significant utility with an index too.
Yeah, okay, great. So I guess, at this point, maybe I'll take some time to explain about the IPOR protocol and, particularly why we actually started with the index. So the IPOR protocol is, the inter-protocol overblock rate, and it has, significant, if you think of, what was called the most important rate is the LIBOR, the London Interbank Offered Rate, and it's essentially a synthesis of what's the free market rate and the free market cost of capital. Of course, it was wound down because there was manipulation by traders inside banks, but we have this very unique, as Simon said, you can tap right into the contracts of the protocols to read the rate. So it really takes out this manipulation aspect, and we get something actually better than the LIBOR, which was published at 11 a.m. BST, or like an overnight rate, and we get this real-time rate in DeFi. So this is the best. The best construct that we've ever had for something that's non-manipulable, something that's persistently available, and something that can be, let's say, this public good. And so, all these different markets are really making the markets more efficient, right? If we're talking about actually, so Contango, it's actually, it's a product that gets its pricing from trading other products, right? So that will bring the market into alignment. Morpho optimizing liquidity across a mid-market rate. Voltz, you're able to hedge your rate across a single market, which really covers your basis risk. And then IPOR is, let's say, this composite index rate, which is, from a visibility standpoint, you can compare it to the most liquid markets in DeFi, and you can use that for arbitrage opportunities, for basis trading, or you can use it to spin up new markets. It's essentially a synthesis of what's happening in the markets, and from the use of these protocols, across the different trading tools, it should really bring the markets into alignment. So, some of one of the big things about fixed income is that fixed income it's one of the largest markets in the world. So I recently caught up with one of our investors in Singapore, and he was telling me, I pitch you guys everywhere. I don't know how to pitch you, but this is how I do it. And I said, okay, tell me how you pitch it. He said, In crypto and in DeFi, everyone is crazy about these exotic derivative instruments. Everyone's crazy about these perpetual instruments, and they're highly speculative. They're very fun. You can get wrecked, and people love them. But if you look at the market sizing in traditional markets, exotics are such a small subset, while these money markets are the kings. So. And these money market players, these traditional fixed income players are very large, and DeFi right now is a very small pool. So, maybe kind of two-part question to the panel. One is, how will institutions be able to access DeFi? Do you think that they'll be able to use this permissionless construct? Will they push it all towards a permissioned, let's say, DeFi mechanism? We saw JP Morgan doing a cross-border trade on a permissioned Ethereum chain, and I believe last month. Will institutions be able to adopt this open finance framework, or will it be a permissioned world?
Can you hear me? Oh yeah,
Yes.
cool. I think right now, if I'm honest, I believe there are way too many moving pieces to really engage into a meaningful discussion about bringing institutionals. I think what happened with FTX is extremely messy. I think the biggest thing to onboard this kind of people is certainly now a regulatory framework. And if I can maybe give my opinion, I feel that as protocols right now in DeFi, we need to focus more on our power users and people from our ecosystem that are going to use our protocols and try to bring utility to them first. Because yes, sure, there's a lot of money in institutions, but it's very difficult for them right now, and it's very difficult for them also to engage with us, and if anything wrong happens, to justify that they try to engage with us, right? So in the eyes of the public, I believe that there is a bit of work to do. I also believe that we need to bring proof of concepts. I like the fact that you mentioned the JP Morgan example, and obviously we would love to have more proof of concept this way. I don't believe we're there yet. That's how I see the thing.
I am happy to diverge. So I think there's really 2 points there. There's on one hand, there's kind of what does DeFi enable for the world, and I don't think we should ever lose sight when we're talking about institutions. I don't think we should ever lose sight of the fact that as an ecosystem, it is fundamentally better than what exists in traditional finance today. If you think about how do you create a financial system, well, as a society, we basically have two options, in my opinion. You can have the first option, which is what we've done in the past, which is that you have centralized entities that act as the gatekeepers to the financial system. The issue with that is that those entities are extremely opaque, and they have massive potential for incentive misalignment. So as a society, what we've done is we basically regulated the hell out of them. And that has enabled, in some instances, for us to address those limitations. The problem is, of course, that regulation always lags innovation, and there are times where that just massively blows up. And we've seen that in 2008, and arguably we've also seen that in the most recent CeFi collapse. So if we have a financial system that is controlled by centralized entities, then there are these limitations. What DeFi enables, actually, and what's so exciting about the ecosystem at the most macro level, is it addresses many of those limitations. So instead of having kind of opaque, kind of centralized entities in control of the system, instead you have these open source, transparent protocols that act as public goods, where the rules of the system are known to everybody, and basically enable people to interact with them in a manner where they're not at risk of this kind of incentive misalignment happening on the inside. So I don't think we should lose sight of that. But then there is also this kind of question of like, well, in the interim, obviously a lot of capital goes to institutions. So are institutions going to start operating on DeFi as the new financial rails? And what's actually, in my opinion, even more exciting is that if you kind of go underneath what DeFi unlocks at a kind of society level, and you actually start considering the fundamentals of the technology itself, well, the fundamentals of the technology are better than what exists in traditional finance too. So even seemingly simple things like 24/7 markets, self-custody, instant settlement, kind of block by block P&L and margin management, and then arguably one of the biggest, which is the kind of efficiency with which you can create a exchange, right? Why employ thousands of people where you can literally have a set of smart contracts that enable the exchange to exist and kind of operate autonomously to infinity? So those benefits are so strong that, in my opinion, the institutions are going to come in and start using DeFi as new financial rails. The challenge, of course, is that there's a huge educational hurdle, and there's kind of, from the institution's perspective, there's a new set of risks that they're not yet familiar with. And what we need to do as an entire industry, frankly, is to help educate the institutions, right, and help them understand these risks, help them better manage those risks. And then that will enable us to start having these huge flows of capital coming through these new rails that we are creating.
Yeah, so there's always this this tension and then this dynamic between innovation and regulation, right? And one of the issues that I think the crypto industry, or now the beautiful rebranding to Web3, whatever you want to call it, DeFi, there's this, everything is everything. Bitcoin is Ethereum, is DeFi, is CeFi, is FTX, is the Celsius failure. And so this is one of the issues that the industry, I think our industry as a whole has a problem with. And so what's the best way to, for example, educate users, educate regulators? Like, for example, in the Celsius collapse, the DeFi world could look at the Aave contracts, for example, to see Celsius paying off their debt to get their ETH out, right? And so this was actually the only transparency that we could see was on chain. They had opaque books. We have more issues coming out, but the DeFi element was actually the only thing that could not be negotiated with. It could not be hidden, and it's beautiful from a transparency perspective. My worry is that with the collapse of let's say malicious or CeFi players, that the general public, the regulators, they conflate everything as everything else. And my biggest worry is that the regulation will quash innovation. And as you mentioned, DeFi is open, it's transparent. And Kamel, what you mentioned about the construction of the Contango instruments is you can actually do this multi-call contract on chain, and it was never before possible, through centralized finance. So, I mean, it's this the regulation risk is always this. Kind of big barrier and big scary thing in the room, right? So, how do you guys deal with that?
I think there's a difference between pushing our boundaries and try to onboard institutionals right now. Like, I think we're ahead of the game. I think we're clearly seeing the benefits of DeFi. I think is a better thing for humanity, and it's a better like financial system, like for sure. Like you see what happened to FTX, which is a futures exchange, and we're building futures, you can see that the kind of stuff they have done could have never happened with the decentralized protocol. So like being in the space for us is very natural to see the benefits and how we're going to push forward our ecosystem. I believe this is very bullish for us, but that doesn't mean that right now the focus should be on trying to onboard institutionals. We still need to consolidate our space. We have our own set of problems. We can never compare the liquidity that we have at the moment with the liquidity that you can find in CeFi, for example, just to start with, not even going to TradFi. And I think in Web3, we love comparing our age to the start of the internet. And I think we're all building some pillars here. And there is still some work to do, right? So we need to focus on bringing more stability, more tools, more liquidity. And I believe that onboarding institutional is something that is going to come naturally when our industry is going to consolidate.
I would have a few thoughts on this, and actually three. The first thing is the biggest obstacle, to my understanding, is regulatory, and I don't know about those regulatory issues, so I'm not going to talk about them. But then you have two things, in my opinion. The first thing is efficiency and natural yield. So the point is that if you go to DeFi, you have all sorts of risks, all sorts of novelty, but the yield and the interest and like is not here. Like if you look at Aave or Compound or whatever protocol, like you have, I think, under 1% APY on USDC in the last 6 months, while in traditional finance you have like 3 times this easy. And my point here is that why would even someone want to go there? Of course, we have infrastructure cost reduction because of DeFi. Like there's plenty of cool things in DeFi, but I'm just thinking the mechanisms and the protocols that we're building, the pillars that you were just mentioning, Kamel, are not here yet. And I think token design and token incentives are responsible for part of it, is because for a long time you had those many token incentives that really were hiding the fact that protocols were not working the way they should be working, or that we have not found the right mechanism design yet. And so I do think we still need to work on mechanism design in order to have those primitives that are suited for the decentralized world and that bring sufficient efficiency for even for a traditional player to even be interested in moving to DeFi. Because yeah, sure, last year we had 20% APY. We know what this led to, obviously. But when you remove the incentives, when you remove token designs, well, you look at the rates and you say, hey, like DeFi is completely off the boat here. So yeah, I would say a big part of it would be to improve mechanism, bring on real world stuff, real world yields. And the third thing is trust. And those people don't understand, to be honest, fully what we are building. And I mean, I believe they should not have to. And I think formal verification, which is a very niche security topic, is essential here. And I want to be in the future providing users or institutional players with formal specification of a product saying, hey, this product can do this, this, this. Just don't trust me. This is math. Like literally, there is no bug in my smart contract. This is math. And like, there's nothing you can not trust about using that primitive. And then you don't have to, it's not rational to fear about it. And those players are rational. So I think those are 3 important points in order to get this next, big wave of growth. But as I kind of, for the moment, I think that's quite far away. So I would, join Kamel on the fact that we should, for now, focus on building around like the users that we have currently in DeFi, but at the same time have this, long-term perception of the market where we onboard those institutional players through the different points that I mentioned.
Yeah, one interesting thing about a bear market is it removes a lot of the noise. It removes a lot of the tourists, the opportunists, and the people that are very mission driven. They're the ones that are staying. So I would consider all of the people on this chat is DeFi 2.0 or DeFi 3.0, whatever you want to call it, whatever stage that we're at. But it's improving on these different mechanisms. So Morpho, even you're creating a new rate dynamic that's leveraging off of a very 1.0 rate dynamic, which is this simple utilization and bonding curve, right? But maybe we need some new innovation along the rate space. Voltz and IPOR, it underpins the rate space, but the actual rate space, we have a strong disconnect. IPOR Labs, we published a piece maybe a couple of months ago. What's the carry trade opportunity? Borrowing cheap DeFi and lending in TradFi. And this is kind of a crazy dynamic. I definitely would have never expected it, thinking of 1-2 years ago, but that's where we are. And one of the main reasons is because the credit capacity is essentially collapsed. The price of the collateral assets has collapsed, while we actually haven't had a lot of capital exit, from the DeFi credit markets, at least in let's say USDC, USDT, DAI. Right. So from a utilization perspective, that's going to be much lower, which drives rates lower, just based on, let's say, the simple Aave and compound construction. But it also means that our space is not that sophisticated, because you have people essentially with this trapped capital that's earning 1% yield. And in an efficient market, the money should find the yield. So why do you guys think this is happening? Why is this tens of billions in stable coins just sitting in DeFi earning low yield?
Maybe I can take a little bit on that subject. I think there are two questions here. Is that why people are staying and why interests are so low? So I think there's clearly more than interest rates at stake for those that are staying in Aave and Compound and Maker, not Maker, sorry, those interest rate protocols. And the reason is, for me, that it's decentralized. And those persons do not weight the risk of smart contract the same way an institutional would. And they stay in DeFi because it's DeFi. And the value proposition here is because it's decentralized. And also because you have some friction, you have you're crypto native, you have money in the Knossos safe. The only thing that you could do is put it on Aave Compound, or obviously Morpho Compound or Morpho Aave. And so that's part of the reason why I'm thinking liquidity is not completely evaporating. But let's just remind that the total supply of Aave has shrunk. I think it has been divided by 6 in the last month. So this is huge, and no one is really talking about it. And then about the interest rate, I think it's two things. First thing is that you don't have all the real world assets that you could be using as collateral. If you think of treasury bonds as collateral, or if you look at Aave, there is a true product market fit on STETH. You have on one side people that want to do leverage, and on the other side people that want to do risk-free rate lending of their ETH, which makes complete sense. And so this really represents billions and one of the most important market fits of Aave. So I think bringing it on more yield-bearing tokens as collateral, whether the yield comes from real-world stuff or whether it comes from LPing on a DEX or whatever, could be game changer. And in having the rates up. And finally, of course, mechanism design. Natively Aave and Compound has a very huge spread that I was mentioning, and I think this just cannot stay in the long term. Having a 2% APY spread on some market, it can go up to 10%. So this is completely crazy in my personal opinion, I would say. And so we have to find new paradigms in order to facilitate lending and borrowing in a capital efficient manner. The same way Uniswap came up with Uniswap B3 for DEXs.
Quite excited about Morpho 1, because actually this mid-market rate tracks very closely to the IPOR. So it eliminates this, this basis risk and a spread. But something that you mentioned about with the real world assets. So I think, Simon, you were a speaker at Digital Asset Summit. I sat through one of the panels, which was a couple of I think it was Max Boonen of B2C2 with the Fabric VC, and they were talking about what's the future, what will drive the next bull run, and all the panelists agreed that it was fixed income inside of DeFi, inside of digital assets, and we've seen really the fixed income world in the CeFi evaporate. You have poor risk management, people getting exposure to counterparty risk. You have very poor risk management practices in general, and so maybe it's going to be in this DeFi fixed income world. But I think a lot of them were also hinting at something, Paul, you mentioned, which was real world assets coming on chain. So do you guys think that this is an inevitability? Also, what will happen with the DeFi native assets?
So, well, I think the short answer to that is that I think real world assets have to come on chain if DeFi is to actually deliver on its vision. And I don't actually, like at the most macro level, I really don't think it's overly complicated, right? We've kind of had paper money and paper representations of assets that then transition to digital money, digital representations of assets that can just now transition to tokenized money and tokenized versions of assets. So I think it's inevitably going to happen. There's obviously a bunch of, I think the regulatory challenge starts to become a little bit more complicated there. And then there's also the complication of the legal enforceability of that. If you've got a property that's represented on chain, someone buys it off someone else, right? You buy an NFT of someone else that represents that property. Well, what happens if the person doesn't move out? How do you enforce that? So there are a whole bunch of new challenges that exist around that. I think maybe going back to some of the other points on the institutional stuff, I think this varies pretty significantly depending on use case and product. I think are institutions going to come into DeFi for yield? Almost certainly not. Right? Why would you? But I think there are kind of many other use cases and kind of exchanges and that type of thing, which are better than what exists in traditional finance today. So there's kind of a reason for them to start getting involved. Going to take a long time, requires education. In the meantime, we can all kind of focus on building DeFi and growing DeFi. And then on the other point, kind of around, rates have been suppressed. Well, in an efficient market, a lot of the capital would move, of course, go kind of sit in TradFi where you can get a higher yield. But I think there's kind of a few questions there. It's well, there's a lot of friction with your on and off ramps, which is one thing. And then I think the other thing is well, if you're going to keep it in kind of a stable coin, for example, where are you going to hold that right now? Are you going to put it on a CeFi exchange? Almost certainly not. So it's going to continue to sit in places like Aave and Compound or through Morpho, where you can earn some sort of yield, even if that yield is less than traditional finance.
Yeah, so I mean, this concept of counterparty risk this idea of counterparty risk in CeFi is quite funny. In the DeFi aspect, we're worried about sticking funds in a bank, right? And that's exactly what blew up, like, let's say in the big CeFi lenders, but also, you have this transparency on chain. So, for example, if you have ETH and you post it as collateral, it's provable, it's on chain, it's native. There's no way to fake this. But even with the real world asset, something that you mentioned was, the legal recognition, the enforceability. You also have the issuer risk, right? And that's something that's you always have this issuer risk whenever you're replicating a digital twin of some asset, right? If you're essentially tokenizing a house, you have to have this provability that, you know, the asset exists. Again, you know, you mentioned the legal aspects, or for example, in a gold reserve, you're buying a right to something, but if you don't have the physical object, you know, how do you prove it? But it's also nice to know, you know, that maybe this NFT space is much more than just monkey pictures, and you know, we can actually get real world yield bearing assets on chain. You know, so I think that's quite interesting. So, Kamel, did you want to add something?
Yes, like on what could be a catalyst for the next DeFi bull run. Obviously, what happened in the past weeks is, I would say, super interesting. I think we saw a lot of money going out of CeFi, and I will agree with Simon that we should see some money back in DeFi and being like invested in different protocols. I also believe that we're seeing like some huge improvements on layer twos. Like we're deep into it, but let's not forget that layer twos only came up last year, really into production, at least on Ethereum, and like you're gonna have like new stuff coming up, bringing like transaction fees really low, and we can like start really comparing with the speed and transaction fees of stuff like CeFi. So yes, I think like a big catalyst would be like to bring all these users to our ecosystem. And I also believe that we're gonna see maybe new apps being built on top of these new layer twos that are not necessarily DeFi, but that could bring more users from traditional Web 2, and by these apps taking off, being also attraction to DeFi, because you're still gonna need to swap stuff to pay for service, for example, being like the native token of this new app with stable coins or ETH or whatever we could have around. So it's pretty exciting to see what is going to happen there.
Yeah, and maybe as we're coming up, you know, almost on an hour here, if anyone in the audience has some questions, you know, just raise your hand. Vlad will bring you up on stage. Okay, so I mean, we talked a little bit about, you know, kind of institutional adoption in this space, and does anyone have a guess on, let's say, a timeline? Because, for example, you know, one of our thesis is that the lending space powers the asset space. It's a rising tide lifts all boats kind of scenario, where you have a lot of, I mean, and this is something that really powered, let's say, the last bull market. You had a lot of capital that was entering the space, and of course that goes towards speculation on assets. It goes towards trading, but you know, this DeFi fixed income is a conduit, you know, that actually benefits all assets, right? So if we don't have a lot of external capital coming in from traditional players, if a lot of people are, you know, feeling hurt from this bear market that we're currently experiencing, you know, what is the timeline, if at all, in, you know, bringing institutions into DeFi?
Well, Darren, if you don't mind, actually, I'm really interested to hear your opinion on this. If I can turn it back to you.
So I'm always, let's say, a little skeptic. You know, I've heard for a long time, I like this Bitcoin. I like this blockchain, but I don't like this Bitcoin thing. And so I'll give some analogies, right? So I was at Digital Asset Summit for the first time in London in 2020. And it was a lot of the people that were working inside of traditional, in traditional finance, right? And they started going crazy about crypto assets. Crypto assets are great, and it's more of the realization. Well, maybe not the realization, but you don't really get a blockchain without this economic incentive to keep it pure. the mechanism, this proof of work mechanism is what makes Bitcoin work. It was the thing that really kicked off this entire space, right? So, I had a thesis probably in 2018 that I'm happy to hopefully that it's being proved wrong now. I thought that this permissioned world was going to grow and essentially try to push out all of the open blockchain narratives, and that this open blockchain space would be kind of a smaller niche ecosystem. But we're seeing that actually we have a lot of institutional investors that are setting up crypto desks. They're looking at DeFi from a technology stack to power different financial instruments. So if we compress, let's say, this 10-year institutional at least curiosity into crypto assets, DeFi is maybe, I would say, 2 to 4 year time frame where it's studying, it's understanding how it's working, and then probably looking at some internal repiping. But maybe this fixed income world, this whole DeFi infrastructure will keep growing, and then it just makes sense to bolt on to the existing players. That's my hope, right? So let's say a 2 to 4 year time frame before these institutions are really going to start looking at this decentralized finance as a viable stack.
I think we should expect as well traditional players coming in not to use the protocols, but also to build the protocols from the inside. So what I mean by that is that when we were mentioning real world assets and collateral, I think that could be another great way for institutional to come in, right? So they have a ton of debts of various firms. Those players would be very interested in minting DAI or borrowing USDC out of those bonds that they have. And I do think that maybe if it were to come at some place like in DeFi very soon, that would be it, in my opinion. It's like having another way for them to take leverage on the asset. DAI is a reasonable thing to hold as an institutional, depending on the institutional. So I think that could be also a way to move forward for them, instead of just classically using the protocol, being part of it and proposing some stuff. I think in France we have the second largest bank that has proposed on the MakerDAO governance forum to list as collateral one of its tokenized debt. And I'm not up to date with the state of this proposal, but I just see that as very interesting. And so some are already, investigating this.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing, both Simon and Kamel have touched on this. It's access. For example, this open access. So let's talk about interest rate derivatives market, right? This is not accessible by retail traders. It's bank to bank. It's very large scale, and maybe with these protocols, Voltz, IPOR, it's the first time that someone can access this market to hedge their rate risk, right? So this kind of open access creates new opportunities, and that's what's really exciting. That's what's really, personally, it drives me about this space. You take down this kind of walled garden approach, and this composability. It opens up it opens up new markets. And one other thing interesting to note is you'll have a lot of people that are individuals, working inside these institutions that are individually experimenting. They're testing out different protocols. They're seeing how they work. They get personal access and exposure to crypto assets, to DeFi, and then these will be the ones that are really actually leveraging this technology and maybe pushing it internally. So even users and explorers, a lot of them come from traditional finance. Most of the big crypto trading firms come from different desk jobs, trading desks, writing algos, and they got into it either as personal hobbyists, and it becomes now a very, very viable thing. So let's not discount that individuals that are acting with these DeFi protocols, they also work inside some of these institutions.
One comment on my side, since we have like about 4 minutes left, is that the composability is really a major feature of DeFi and something that I believe it's a major advantage when it comes to TradFi, where things are happening much more slowly when one company needs to or one product needs to integrate with another. But my general worry is that with regulations and with potential like introduction of some user identification systems, this composability could suffer. And so I'm very curious to kind of see how regulations will develop and see what the effect on DeFi will be, especially in terms of composability. So if you have some comments on that.
Maybe just one point that or one comment really to that point. So if you go back to kind of some of the stuff that we were saying right at the beginning around what we were optimizing for when designing Volt's protocol, one of those was obviously to make sure that everything around the AMM existed on chain to make the protocol as composable as possible. And the reason for that is that obviously you've got these kind of various different use cases across speculation, risk management, but then also product construction, where a lot of people actually would interact with an interest rate swap through a product. And the most obvious example of that is a fixed rate mortgage. But what's interesting and is that kind of DeFi as an ecosystem is obviously all open source. One of the massive benefits of that is everything is transparent. But one of the other benefits of that is that unlike in traditional finance where everything is closed source and you have this kind of walled garden approach, what that means is that there's only a very limited talent pool, so to speak, of people who can go in and innovate on top of those kind of low-level building blocks. By having everything in DeFi, open source, fully on-chain, such that it is composable, I'm not kind of necessarily kind of agreeing that regulation is going to limit that in some way, but if just in a world where it does, well, that's counteracted by the fact that as a result of making it open source, you have the potential for so many more people to innovate and build on top of it, that I would argue that that would counteract any potential effects that you're suggesting might take place.
Yeah. So Simon, one thing you mentioned, is I just had I just lost my frame of thought. Okay, so one thing you mentioned and was okay. So actually, with Aave Arc, there was very little. Aave Arc essentially an institutional borrowing. Let's say an institutional permissioned version of Aave, and that institutions, they don't really have this imperative to look on chain for yield. And so it got very little uptake, and so that's not necessarily saying that it's not a thing. It's just not exciting enough or big enough for institutions right now. But the Aave Arc, it also shows that you can build composability even in terms of regulatory, right? So you can actually have a smart contract call that acts as a KYC or a compliance mechanism, and so the composability actually makes it very friendly and maybe much more friendly than a closed source system. So I don't think it's a barrier. One of the biggest issues is we don't have clarity. There's really no clarity into how to deal with these things. So even from a technological angle, there are things that are maybe incompatible, and regulators and innovators need to get together and discuss these things. So for example, there was a hack of Bitfinex, I think 2017, 2016. And one of the issues was because of a CFTC regulation, they had to have segregated hot wallets per users. And it was a multi-sig construction. One of the keys got compromised and it was signing, and then I think BitCo was one of the 2 of 3 signers, and it was automatically signing these, and this was the reason from the big hack, right? So the regulatory compliance on that required actually a very unsafe construction of the user wallets on the exchange side. On the DeFi side, it's actually not possible. It's possible, but it's computationally inefficient to have these segregated pools. So this is one thing that I think we have to have more open discussion, because you can't take something like a segregated user account and simply apply it because it's a different technological construction. So these are things that I don't think they're incompatible, but there needs to be a lot more well thought out dialogue, because something like that, it's not necessarily that DeFi is trying to build itself, that it can't meet with regulation, but this particular stack on Ethereum doesn't make it usable from a technological standpoint. So there's a lot of things that you need a lot of education on kind of all sides to make rational, reasonable choices.
Completely agree with that last point. Regulators will have to, well, they don't have to, but it would be generally better for the industry if regulators actually understand the technology and what we're trying to do here. I don't see any more questions. So if there aren't any other comments coming from the speakers, yeah, we can close the talk. Anyone wants to announce something exciting that is coming in relation to that project, or just a general comment or final words?
Nothing in particular on my side. Just like thanking IPOR for hosting the Twitter space and for having us on this session.
Yeah, I was about to say the exact same. Obviously, been awesome to be here. Thanks for hosting. We're doing a panel in a minute, Darren.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely great together. Yeah, cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you
guys.
once again for joining. So as you have already noticed, we are recording this. So I also try to extract this from Twitter, download it, and then publish it as a podcast on our YouTube. Let's see how that will go. But yeah, it will be available for 30 days. Yeah, for anyone who has missed it. So thank you once again. Thank you, Darren, for co-hosting, and see you guys around. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.